I was actually ready to tell you guys a story about the wedding.
Yeah.
Do you want to hear it?
Yes,
do.
Okay.
Kaputs overnight after a stupid social media bust-up back in 2020.
A black social media influencer, and there was a lot of talk about how Meghan was going to dump Mulroney from her group of friends. But
at 45, most people choose peace over drama. They let things go, move on, protect what's left of their quiet life. So when Jessica Mulroney finally broke her silence after years of staying quiet, it wasn't for attention, not for revenge either. The weight she'd been carrying just got too heavy to hold anymore. She wasn't just close to Meghan Markle, she was right there in the room. And what she saw behind those closed doors, it'll change everything you thought you knew. Before we dive in, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications because you're going to want to see this. Drop a like if you're ready, and let's get into it. Here's the thing about Jessica Mulroney. She wasn't some random friend who saw Meghan at parties or grabbed coffee once in a while. She wasn't watching from the outside, trying to piece things together from Instagram posts or tabloid headlines. No, Jessica was inside, right there in the room when things happened. She heard the conversations never meant for interviews. She saw the expressions disappearing the second a camera showed up. She witnessed moments existing only in private, vanishing the instant they became public. She was close enough to know what was real and what was just for show. And this position, this proximity, it came with weight. Because when you're this close, you don't just see the polished version everyone else gets. You see everything. The unguarded moments, the comments made when no one's recording, the side of someone only existing behind closed doors. Jessica had all of this. She was there for it, lived through it, and for a long time, she kept it to herself. For years, Jessica watched one version of Meghan's story take over. The interviews played on loop, the talking points got repeated so many times they became facts, and sympathy turned into this whole identity. It stopped being just a narrative. It became what everyone accepted. People believed it because it was all they heard, all they saw. Meanwhile, there was another version of events, one locked away, not because it lacked importance, but because of how heavy it was. Really heavy. The kind of heavy making you think twice before saying anything at all. And Jessica carried it quietly, thinking, this is what friendship meant. This is what loyalty looked like, right? You absorbed the uncomfortable parts without complaining. You stayed quiet because this is what you do for people you care about. You don't air things out. You don't contradict the story they're telling. You just hold it and hope it gets easier over time. But it never got easier. If anything, it got harder. Because every time the public version of events got repeated, every single time it was treated like absolute fact, Jessica felt the weight of her knowledge pressing down a little more. She had been there, not nearby, not adjacent, inside the room.
Jessica was part of the fiasco that allegedly made Princess Catherine cry around Meghan's tacky wedding.
She knew what had been said, what had actually occurred, and how different it was from what the world was hearing. And the gap, the distance between private reality and public story, it started feeling like something she was protecting. Not protecting Meghan, but protecting a version of events maybe not deserving protection. Here's where it gets complicated. At some point, the silence stopped feeling like protection. It started feeling like something else entirely. Because when you're holding on to information contradicting everything the world believes, staying quiet stops being just about loyalty anymore. It becomes complicity. It becomes this thing you're carrying, sitting heavier every single day. And for Jessica, the weight kept building year after year until it crossed from uncomfortable to unbearable. She'd believed keeping quiet was the right thing to do. How good friends don't tell stories, not theirs to tell. But what happens when your silence starts feeling like you're covering for something? What happens when loyalty stops being about friendship and starts being about control? This shift doesn't happen overnight. It's gradual. It's the slow realization of what you thought was mutual respect actually being something much more one-sided. And when Jessica felt this shift, when she recognized it for what it was, there was no going back. So what exactly did Jessica see behind those closed doors? Well, according to her, it started with small things. Comments here and there, little moments you could brush off if you wanted to. But they added up, and the first one Jessica couldn't shake? It was about the Queen. Now, you'd think meeting the Queen of England would be a pretty big deal, right? Centuries of tradition, an institution older than most countries, a woman who dedicated nearly a century to duty and service. But according to Jessica, Meghan saw things differently. She allegedly called her just a little old lady in a hat. Not in anger, not out of frustration or stress, just casually, like she was talking about someone from down the street. And then came the question, why should I bow to her? Here's why this stuck with Jessica. There was no emotion behind it, no heat, no tension, no fear, just dismissiveness. Comfortable, matter-of-fact dismissiveness, like it was the most obvious thing in the world. And maybe for Meghan it was, but for Jessica, hearing someone talk about the Queen like this hit different. Because this went beyond not understanding royal protocol or feeling out of place in a new culture. This was about fundamentally not caring about the meaning behind any of it. See, the curtsy isn't just some weird tradition people do for fun. It's a symbol. It represents respect for something bigger than yourself, for an institution built on duty and sacrifice spanning generations. Almost 100 years of service, of putting the country before personal desires, of showing up day after day without fail.
How Jessica Mulroney's going at the moment on antidepressants, her life completely destroyed because of her friendship with Meghan Markle.
All reduced to an inconvenience, an unnecessary gesture, something beneath her. And look, you could argue Meghan came from a completely different world. Hollywood operates on different rules. Fame is individual there. You build your own brand, control your own narrative, make yourself the center of attention. The monarchy? It's the opposite. No individual outshines the institution. You serve something larger than yourself. Those two worlds were never going to see eye to eye. But Jessica realized in this moment how deep the disconnect went. This wasn't culture shock talking, not adjustment period nerves, or feeling overwhelmed by a completely foreign system. This was a fundamental rejection of everything the institution stood for. The Queen got minimized as a symbol, her entire life's work dismissed in one casual sentence. And according to Jessica, this comment wasn't some one-off remark made in a bad moment. This was part of how Meghan viewed things. Because once you decide the rules don't apply to you, once you've convinced yourself the traditions are outdated and the expectations are obstacles instead of honors, everything else starts making sense. The curtsy becomes performance instead of respect. The protocols become inconveniences instead of meaningful gestures. The role itself stops being something you're grateful for and becomes just a platform, a stage, a tool to use. And Jessica caught this early. She heard it in private before anyone else did. She saw the way Meghan talked about royal life when cameras weren't around, when there was no interview happening, when they were just friends in a room. The dismissiveness wasn't an act or a moment of weakness. It was genuine, how she really felt. And for Jessica, recognizing this shift in perspective explained so much of the future. Because if you start from the position where nothing is sacred, where tradition means nothing and duty is just old-fashioned thinking, then of course you're going to clash with an institution built entirely on those principles. The question wasn't whether Meghan would struggle with royal life. The question was whether she ever believed in it at all. But the Queen comment was just the beginning. According to Jessica, once you heard how Meghan talked about one member of the royal family in private, you started noticing a pattern. And others soon followed. Prince William was apparently a regular punchline. His formality, his seriousness, the way he carried himself, all of it allegedly got mocked behind closed doors. Jessica said Meghan would mimic him, exaggerating his posture and his carefully measured way of speaking, turning the future king into a joke meant for laughs instead of respect. Here's the thing. William's entire life has been preparation. He's been groomed since birth to eventually lead, to understand the weight of responsibility, to take the role seriously because one day it'll be his. Yet according to Jessica,
rehearsals at the royal wedding, they were just messing up. They just couldn't get it right.
Meghan saw all of his restraint and discipline as something to make fun of, not admire. Then there was Kate. Now publicly, Meghan praised her. In interviews, Kate was mentioned warmly, respectfully. Privately, different story. Jessica remembered comments about Kate's smile being too rehearsed, too perfect, like she was always performing. Her warmth got framed not as genuine kindness, but as calculation. Her composure interpreted not as the discipline required to always be camera-ready and gracious under pressure, but as dullness. Like being polished and professional somehow made her less interesting, less real. Kate spent years mastering the balance of being relatable while representing the monarchy. She's managed to modernize the image without losing the dignity the role requires. Still, if you're determined to see someone as fake, you can twist anything into proof. A practiced smile turns into evidence of inauthenticity. Kindness transforms into strategy. Grace reads as boring. Charles came next. His speeches, the way he used his hands when he talked, his earnestness about causes he believed in, all turned into material for impressions, delivered confidently like everyone in the room would find it just as funny. Maybe some people did laugh. Maybe some people went along with it because calling out someone more powerful than you in a private setting takes guts most people don't have. Jessica noticed, though. She noticed how easily respect got replaced with mockery, how quickly admiration turned into ammunition for jokes. Here's the moment Jessica couldn't ignore, though. Princess Anne. Now, if you know anything about Princess Anne, you know she spent decades in service. No scandals, no drama, no chasing headlines, just quiet, relentless work. Year after year of showing up, doing the job, supporting the institution without demanding attention. She's the definition of duty over ego. According to Jessica, Meghan dismissed her as irrelevant, invisible, a non-factor, not because Princess Anne had done anything wrong, but because she wasn't visible enough. She didn't command the spotlight. She didn't generate headlines. In Meghan's private hierarchy, if you didn't grab attention, you simply didn't count. Relevance held more weight than duty. Visibility outranked endurance. Impact trumped longevity. This was the philosophy Jessica kept seeing play out. Not about individual personalities clashing or different communication styles causing friction. This was about fundamentally different values colliding. The monarchy is built on longevity, on the belief no single person outshines the institution. You serve something bigger than yourself.
I got back in touch with Jessica Mulroney. Also, is Meghan Markle secretly fearing a split from Prince Harry?
You show up consistently, you do the work, you put duty before personal glory. Meghan in this telling operated from a completely different playbook. Presence held value. Impact held value. Being interesting, being talked about, being the center of attention, those things mattered most. Anything or anyone not contributing to visibility got mentally filed away as irrelevant. Once Jessica recognized this pattern, once she saw how consistently it played out across every member of the family, she realized the fracture line ran deeper than anyone outside the situation could see. Now, all of these private comments, all the mimicking and the dismissiveness, You could write them off as venting if they stayed small. People talk, they blow off steam, they say things in private they'd never say publicly. According to Jessica, though, there was a turning point when everything shifted from casual mockery to something much harder to ignore. It happened at a dinner party, not some big palace event with protocols and cameras, not a public appearance where everyone's on their best behavior. Just a private table with people Meghan trusted. Close friends, no phones out, no recordings, no consequences. Or at least that's how it seemed. The wine was flowing. Stories were getting shared. Everyone was relaxed. Meghan was comfortable, confident, clearly in her element. The conversation turned to the royal family at some point. Jessica doesn't specify how, and someone mentioned the Queen. Meghan didn't hesitate. She said, "If it weren't for me, they'd still be stuck in the past. I'm the only interesting thing that's happened to that family in decades." The room went silent. Not the comfortable kind where people are just listening. The uncomfortable kind. The kind where you can feel the air change. Jessica remembered exactly what happened. Forks stopping midair, people suddenly fixating on their wine glasses, eyes dropping to plates. And Harry? Harry looked down instead of up. He didn't smile. He didn't laugh. He just looked down. That split second told Jessica everything she needed to know. This wasn't a joke. There was no playful tone, no hint of self-awareness, no winking exaggeration. This was a declaration, a genuine belief. Meghan truly thought she'd single-handedly dragged the monarchy into relevance. The institution surviving centuries, adapting through world wars, navigating countless scandals and cultural shifts, all of it apparently irrelevant until she showed up. Here's what made this pivotal for Jessica: the entitlement. Not anger, not frustration, not even arrogance in the traditional sense. Just this calm, matter-of-fact entitlement. Like, of course the royal family needed her. Like, obviously, she was the catalyst for their modern relevance.
Look, she says that she's also been accused of using a so-called superpower, in that Meghan is her protection, I guess.
Like it was simply true, and anyone who didn't see it was missing the obvious. The dinner continued. People moved past it. Conversation shifted to safer territory. Jessica said she never saw Meghan's public smile the same way afterward. Because once you hear someone claim dominance in a room like this, once you witness them positioning themselves as the center of someone else's story, you can't pretend the polished version is the complete truth anymore. The gracious interviews, the carefully worded statements about service and duty, all of it started feeling like performance. And perhaps it had always been performance. Perhaps Jessica had just finally seen behind the curtain. According to people there in this account, Harry didn't always laugh along during exchanges like these. Sometimes he smiled, sometimes he stayed silent. Sometimes you could see tension in his jaw, his eyes staying fixed on the table, the internal conflict playing out across his face without words. He'd been raised to revere his grandmother, to understand duty as inheritance rather than choice. The monarchy wasn't just his job. It was his identity, his legacy. Everything he'd been taught should matter. Yet he was also a husband. And in those rooms, the power dynamic was becoming clear. Meghan spoke, others adjusted. Harry's lack of response in situations like the dinner party, it wasn't neutrality, it was tacit permission. Not necessarily conscious permission. Not necessarily intentional. Still, staying silent in those situations gave space for the narrative to stand unchallenged. And unchallenged narratives have a way of becoming accepted, truth, even when they probably shouldn't. For Jessica, watching this dynamic play out over time, seeing Harry's visible discomfort but consistent inaction, it added another layer to her growing unease about where all of this was heading. For years, Jessica defended Meghan. When critics came out, Jessica pushed back. When doubt crept in, she absorbed it. She told herself the private discomfort wasn't her story to tell. Friends protect each other, right? You don't air things out. You don't break trust. You stay loyal even when it's uncomfortable, especially when it's uncomfortable. Then a request came. Not for friendship, not for emotional support or a shoulder to lean on. This was different. Jessica won't say exactly what was asked of her. She's kept that detail private even in her telling of events. The implication was clear, though. This went beyond mutual support. This required Jessica to put herself at risk, to provide cover, to offer protection going beyond what friendship should demand. It was the kind of request that crosses a line, the kind where you realize loyalty has been redefined without your consent, where what started as two people supporting each other
Scene. And so Meghan really glommed on to Jessica, and the two became fast friends.
has quietly transformed into one person expecting the other to sacrifice without question. And when the balance tips that far, when the relationship becomes about what you can provide rather than shared connection, the foundation cracks. Jessica said no, not dramatically, not with a big speech or emotional confrontation. She just refused. And that refusal changed everything instantly. The friendship didn't fade gradually. It didn't peter out over months of growing distance. It vanished overnight. Messages stopped coming. Invitations disappeared. Phone calls ended. Years of closeness, all the shared moments and inside jokes in history, erased like they'd never existed. Jessica went from being inside the circle to being completely shut out, and it happened so fast there wasn't even time to process it. The realization hit hard. This hadn't been friendship that soured. This was a transactional relationship she'd mistaken for genuine connection. Because true friendships don't evaporate the second you can't deliver. True friends don't cut you off completely because you set a boundary. Authentic relationships can survive disagreement, survive you saying no, survive conflict. Arrangements can't. Dynamics built on usefulness rather than affection can. Jessica had been an asset, a resource, someone who provided value through proximity, through support, through willingness to defend and protect. As long as she played that role, the relationship continued. The moment she stepped back, though, the moment she prioritized her own well-being over Meghan's needs, she became expendable, used up, no longer necessary. Looking back, Jessica started recognizing signs she'd ignored for too long. The way conversations had gradually shifted from equal exchange to one-sided expectation. How Meghan's problems became central, while Jessica's barely got mentioned. The way support flowed consistently in one direction without reciprocation. She'd normalized it over time, convinced herself this was just how close friendships looked. Maybe she was being selfish for wanting more balance. This sudden cutoff made everything crystal clear, though. Loyalty had been redefined around her so gradually she hadn't noticed it happening. It stopped being about mutual care and started being about compliance, about showing up when called, defending without question, providing support without expecting any in return. When Jessica finally drew a line, when she finally said, "This is too much," the response wasn't hurt or disappointment or even anger. It was erasure. That's why silence stopped feeling noble. Because loyalty demanding you harm yourself isn't actually loyalty. It's control. And Jessica had been controlled for longer than she wanted to admit. The weight she'd been carrying wasn't just about keeping secrets or protecting a friend. It was about maintaining a fiction.
She doesn't want to get involved in this. She's not getting involved in this. Leave her alone, press. Stop spinning her. Stop making her a story.
Pretending a one-sided dynamic was mutual. Pretending conditional affection was genuine connection. Pretending she mattered when she only mattered for utility. After Jessica saw it clearly, after she recognized the relationship for its reality, staying quiet stopped making sense. Not because she wanted revenge, not because she wanted to hurt anyone. Continuing to protect a version of events that had cost her so much just didn't add up anymore. So why did Jessica finally decide to speak? What pushed her past the point of staying quiet? It wasn't one big explosive moment. It was accumulated weight. It was looking back at the friendship and seeing patterns she'd been blind to while living through them. Comments she'd laughed off at the time suddenly felt different, in hindsight. Eye rolls she'd dismissed as stress. Jokes landing just a bit too sharp to be completely harmless. At first, she told herself everyone vents. Everyone has bad days. Everyone says things in private they don't really mean. Venting doesn't require you to position yourself above everyone else, though. Venting doesn't involve consistent mockery of people who've done nothing to deserve it. Once Jessica started really examining the pattern, once she stepped back far enough to see the full picture, she realized this went deeper than temporary frustration or cultural adjustment. She began replaying the last conversation she ever had with Meghan. There was no big fight, no dramatic blow-up, just a shift in tone. The warmth had drained out of it. Meghan spoke to her differently, not like a friend sharing her life, but like a manager handling a situation. Calculating, directive, expectant. The conversation felt transactional in a way their talks never had before. Or maybe they'd always been like this, and Jessica was only now seeing it clearly. Once usefulness ended, so did affection. Simple as that. The friendship hadn't been building toward anything genuine. It had been serving a purpose. When Jessica could no longer fulfill it, the relationship had no reason to continue. There was no foundation underneath, just utility. This realization didn't make Jessica angry initially. It made her sober, clear-headed, because anger would have meant she still had expectations, still believed things could be different. Instead, she felt this settling certainty. The person she thought she knew had maybe never really existed, or if they had existed, they'd been replaced by somebody else entirely. Somebody who viewed relationships as strategic rather than authentic. The decision to speak publicly came gradually. Jessica didn't wake up one morning plotting to expose secrets or tear anyone down. She just reached a point where carrying the weight of silence cost more than the risk of honesty. Because staying quiet meant continuing to protect a version of events she knew was incomplete.
I don't know how they did it, but it wasn't an easy task, I'll tell you. Things did not look good.
It meant watching interviews and statements and carefully crafted narratives, knowing a whole other side existed, one never getting told unless she told it. Here's the thing, when Jessica did finally speak, she was careful about it. She didn't speculate, she didn't exaggerate, she didn't try to destroy anyone's reputation or score points in some public battle. She simply described her experience, her observations, how it all made her feel, just her perspective told plainly. The reaction was immediate and predictable. People called it betrayal, others called it jealousy, bitterness about being cut off. Then there were those calling it brave. The responses split along the exact same lines as reactions to Meghan herself. You either believed Jessica or you didn't, and where you landed probably depended on your existing perspective. Jessica expected all of this. She knew speaking would open her up to criticism, doubt, accusations. She knew some people would never believe her regardless of evidence. What she didn't fully anticipate was how Meghan would react. Because Meghan didn't respond publicly at first. No statements to the press, no rebuttals, no interviews setting the record straight. Just silence. Intentional silence. Strategic silence. Like deciding the best move is no move at all. According to this telling, though, behind the public silence, things were different. There were tears. Not the performed kind timed for maximum sympathy. The quiet, private type happening when control slips. When an insider, a real insider who was there and saw everything, when they speak up and the version they describe doesn't match the version you've worked so hard to establish. Harry noticed the change immediately, the tension, the irritability. The way Meghan fixated on coverage she claimed not to read. The way she'd ask the same questions over and over like repetition could somehow undo exposure. Why would she say this now? Why couldn't she just stay quiet? He didn't have good answers, because deep down a thought was forming he didn't want to name. When individuals lie, they tend to exaggerate. When folks make things up, they usually overreach, adding details not quite fitting reality. Yet when individuals wait years before speaking, they usually do so because what they're saying isn't convenient to hear. Because timing matters when you're protecting another person. When protection ends, the story comes out. This idea frightened Harry more than direct accusations ever could. He'd been there too. Not for everything, but for enough. He'd heard some of the comments Jessica was now sharing publicly. He'd witnessed some of the moments she described. Not all of them, not necessarily in the exact way she remembered, but enough to know she wasn't inventing things from scratch. According to this telling, Harry's role in all of this had always been complicated. He loved his wife.
So no, it was a really nice moment. It was just the two of us, and I think I managed to catch her by surprise as well. So.
Yeah. He'd chosen her over his family in many ways, made sacrifices most couldn't imagine making. Love doesn't erase awareness, though. It doesn't make you blind to behavior you'd question in anyone else. You can love a person and still recognize patterns, still feel uncomfortable with how they talk about folks you care about. Still notice when private words don't match public actions. In rooms where Meghan spoke freely, where she mocked and dismissed and positioned herself as superior, Harry's participation was inconsistent. Sometimes he laughed, sometimes he smiled awkwardly, sometimes he went completely still, tension visible in his jaw, eyes locked on the table, the internal conflict playing out across his face without words. He'd been raised to revere his grandmother, taught to understand duty as inheritance, not performance. The monarchy wasn't just his job, it was his identity. Everything he'd been taught should matter. Yet he was also a husband. In the moments of conflict, the power dynamic was clear. Meghan spoke, others adjusted, including him. His lack of response during exchanges like this wasn't neutrality. It was tacit permission, perhaps not conscious, perhaps not intentional. Still, when your spouse mocks your family and you say nothing, when they dismiss relatives you were raised to respect and you don't push back, your inaction speaks. It says the relationship with your spouse matters more than defending the relatives being ridiculed. For Harry, it did. Perhaps the choice he made, consciously or not. Jessica saw this play out repeatedly. She watched Harry's discomfort alongside his unwillingness to intervene. She noticed the conflict on his face paired with his consistent inaction. Over time, it added another dimension to her understanding. This wasn't just Meghan operating in isolation. This was a dynamic where Harry's quiet acceptance enabled behavior he probably wouldn't defend if pressed. After Jessica spoke publicly, this dynamic became harder for Harry to ignore. Now an insider who'd witnessed private moments was confirming they'd happened. She wasn't speculating from the outside. She was reporting from inside the room. It changed things. The questions Meghan kept asking, why now? Why couldn't she stay quiet? They revealed a core issue. They weren't questions about accuracy. They were questions about loyalty and timing, about why Jessica had broken ranks after so long. The assumption underneath was clear. The issue wasn't whether events occurred, but whether Jessica had the right to discuss them. For Harry, watching his wife process this exposure, seeing her struggle with the loss of narrative control, it forced a reckoning he probably wasn't ready for. You can tell yourself stories about misunderstandings and cultural differences and media bias. When an insider speaks up, though, explanatory stories get harder to maintain. The foundation was cracking.
Currently in psychiatric treatment. Do you want to go and ask about the love, light, and generosity that Meghan Markle brought to them?
Cracks like this don't heal, they just get covered over until the next time pressure is applied. So how does a story like this end? With vindication, with apologies, with some dramatic confrontation in a candlelit room where everything gets hashed out and resolved? No, it ends the way most real fractures do, with distance. Meghan kept moving forward. She continued doing interviews, kept building her brand, kept telling her version of events. According to those close to the situation, though, a shift had occurred. The certainty wasn't quite as solid anymore. The armor felt heavier. The need to control the narrative intensified, even as controlling it became harder to manage. Because once an insider speaks up, once a person who was actually there contradicts your account, doubt creeps in. Not for everyone, not even for most people, but for enough people to matter. Jessica also stepped into her future, lighter, quieter, finally unburdened by loyalty she'd mistaken for friendship. She didn't do a press tour. She didn't write a tell-all book. She didn't capitalize on the attention her comments generated. She said her piece, then stepped back. Her restraint actually spoke louder than continued media appearances would have. If this were about revenge or attention or jealousy like some claimed, she would have kept going. She would have escalated. Instead, she chose to release the weight and walk away. The public did what audiences always do. They absorbed the information. People argued about it online. Think pieces got written. Hot takes flew back and forth. Team Meghan versus Team Jessica debates raged for a while. Then slowly, inevitably, everyone migrated to the next controversy, the next headline, the next drama demanding attention. Beneath all the noise, though, beneath the takes and the arguments and the eventual shift to other topics, a fundamental change had occurred. Because once the private account of a situation enters public conversation, even briefly, you can't fully erase it. The information lingers. The details sit in the back of people's minds. Future actions and statements get reinterpreted through this new lens. Shadow gets added to places where there used to be only certainty. Like people who believed Meghan's account completely might still believe it. Now there's this other perspective existing alongside it, though. A voice from inside the room saying, actually, here's my experience. Even if you don't fully believe the voice, even if you think Jessica has her own biases or motivations, the existence of her perspective changes things. The narrative gets complicated. No single account can be the unquestioned version anymore. For Meghan, this means every future interview carries Jessica's perspective with it. Every statement about the royal family gets filtered through the private moments Jessica described.
Seacrest. So Meghan's friendship with the pair definitely came with some perks, like relevance.
The public account and the insider account now coexist in the cultural conversation, and you can't separate them anymore. This isn't defeat, vindication either, just the new reality of the situation. For Jessica, she's no longer carrying a secret feeling like it was crushing her. She's no longer watching interviews and biting her tongue while an incomplete account gets presented as the only version. She paid a price for speaking. Criticism, accusations, loss of other friendships, probably. She's also free of a burden carried too long, though. For Harry, he's caught in the middle as he's been from the start, supporting his wife while knowing an insider, one he knows wasn't fabricating things entirely, has painted a very different picture of private moments. Not a comfortable position, not a situation with easy answers or clear right choices. So this is the real ending. Tears happened, probably. Triumph didn't, because nobody really won here. Downfall didn't either, because Meghan's still building her life and career. Just the irreversible moment when silence breaks, and everyone involved has to live with the aftermath. The moment when one person decides the weight of staying quiet costs more than the risk of speaking up. Once the decision is made, once the words are out there, you can't take them back. You can only keep moving into whatever comes next. So there it is, the story Jessica carried for years finally told. If this changed how you see things, or made you think differently about all of this, go ahead and hit that like button. Drop your thoughts in the comments. I'm curious what you think. And if you want more stories that go deeper than the headlines, subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next one. Thanks for watching.